Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. We are really excited to be coming from the Beehive. And today our conversation is around the purpose of higher ed. And we have some amazing guests. We'll bring them up in a few minutes. It's really about, the conversation about the purpose of higher ed is so important because we're all being asked to design it, teach it, bring the next generation. And the question is, do we even have the understanding of what the purpose is? So I think it's going to be a really exciting conversation. I'm going to let Gabrielle jump in and tell you all the logistics of our platform, and then we will bring our guests up.
Awesome. Gabrielle. Thank you, Matt. So for those who are joining us for the first time, welcome. For those of you that are returning, welcome back. You should be pretty seasoned at this platform by now, but we'll go through it really quickly. So there are multiple ways to interact with us today. We do have some amazing guest speakers. However, it's not just our speakers that are part of this conversation. It's also all of you as well. So you are welcome to pop on or ask in the comments to bring you up on stage. I might ask you to come up on stage if I see like an interesting comment from you in the chat. For those that can't join us, it's totally okay. You're not obligated to accept that invite, but just know that I may invite you up, or we would love to hear from you if you would like to come join us as well. This is really awesome because it also is streaming on LinkedIn and YouTube as well. So you can share the YouTube link. We'll be able to see it afterwards. And every voice counts here. So even if you don't speak on stage, you can go ahead and drop your ideas, questions, comments over here in the chat. We find that the chat is actually blowing up a lot more than the actual conversation on stage because there are so many amazing discussion points happening there. So I will be monitoring that. I may bring your comment up, and it should be a really fun ride. I'm trying to think if there is anything else.
Do you want to tell them about the little timer we're going to be using just to keep people on track?
Yeah. So one of the biggest challenges is that we're all very passionate education people, and we love to go on and on and on and on. So Matt discovered this countdown timer. So if we notice that, like, oh man, they've been going on for a while, if you see that timer, it means we want you to wrap it up. Okay. Oh, welcome, Rich from Fort Collins. I love Fort Collins. I went to CSU my freshman year of college. Awesome. Anyway, right. I think that's it. I look forward to hearing from you in the chat.
All right.
Look forward to going about this conversation. Who knows where it's going to go?
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks for those of you putting your name and where you're from in the chat. That's great.
That's awesome. Good. This is going to be really good. We have some amazing guests today. We're all pretty interactive on LinkedIn, and this conversation stemmed from a conversation between Mark Salisbury, President Bolles, and Keil, Dumsch, and we said, hey, let's bring the topic around the purpose of higher ed. That was stemmed from the conversation about closures, right? So while we're not going to, dive into closures, we're going to dive into different attributes of why things are happening in higher ed. Why is understanding the purpose really important is going to be important for us to think through it. So I'm going to ask my guests to jump on stage with me as we start to have this dialogue. They're all going to join us as soon as they turn on their camera, and then you'll start to see them bubbling in. We just need, all right, look at that. That's it. So I'm going to, before we turn it into a real deep dive conversation, I'm going to ask each of them to just give us a little synopsis of who they are. I think it's really healthy for our audience to understand that. And also, why is this topic passionate for you? And then we'll take it from there. Hopefully we won't have to kick on the 30-second timer, but you have a little bit of time to go ahead. Mark, I'm going to let you go first because you are the one that stemmed the conversation with your post on LinkedIn, and then we'll go to Bernard, Keil, Kate, and then Gary and Christine.
Well, thanks, Matt. I'm Mark Salisbury. I've spent my whole career in some form of higher ed or another, and I currently run the Tuition Fit project that's all about making real college prices transparent for everybody in the marketplace. And I ended up being the unwitting founder of this conversation.
Catalyst.
And I think I could just want to start by throwing out there that for us to actually make any progress in improving this whole entity that we're all really passionate about, we actually have to know what the reality is and where it's maybe not what we think it is. And for us to be able to do that, we actually have to have different perspectives who understand different elements of all the data, all of the evidence that shapes what this whole ecosystem looks like. So that's where I'm coming from. And that was part of what inspired the post. And then, yeah.
Thank you. President Bull.
Hi, everyone. Bernard Bull. I currently serve as president of Concordia University in Nebraska. I was formerly president of Goddard College, which recently announced closure. It closed about 3 years after I left as president. And I've spent the last 30 plus years as an ethnographic researcher studying education trends, doing a lot of consulting for a variety of learning organizations, not just higher education institutions, focusing upon emerging models and frameworks for education, but I often use the historical frame to inform a lot of my work.
Sounds good. Keil. You're on mute, Keil. There you go.
Sorry
I got
about
it.
that. Sorry. I'm a tech and travel industry veteran. I've worked for Expedia, Microsoft, and Priceline, and I'm a citizen education reformer. My special interest is in the degree system and job credentialing. I've been researching and discussing the education system, advocating for reform for the last 15 years. I've given talks for Matt at Beyond Academics, Illuminate Higher Education, and the Colorado University Badge Summit. And I hosted interviews. Many of them were co-moderated with Christine on Clubhouse with professors, teachers, authors, journalists, and activists. And the main, like I said, the main area of my focus is on the degree system and its reform. And the reason that I got so passionate about it, I think that there are major problems with the cost and its use in hiring. Thanks.
Just for the audience, just to make sure we're all transparent, Keil is not an AI avatar. That was really Keil. And so I love Keil. So Keil came from, all of us built our relationships together at Clubhouse. And so I always value Keil. We may all not agree with everything that Keil says, but he makes us think differently. And it's something that I really appreciate about his time with us always. Kate, it's all you. You might have to unmute. There you go.
Hey guys, I'm Kate Colbert. I am a former higher education insider and a current higher education prognosticator. Some of you probably know me for a little book I wrote a couple of years ago called Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, which was drawn largely from interviews with 125 college and university presidents, as well as ed tech leaders and others. And, you know, this is an area that's really, really important to me. I say when I talk about higher education that I am just as likely to sort of write a love letter to higher education as I am to be a devil's advocate for it. So the industry is changing. We're going through a lot of evolutions and revolutions, and many of them I think are necessary. And I think some of the painful change is necessary as well. And, you know, I constantly say, and will probably say it multiple times today. I think the biggest mistake that we can make in higher education is continually choosing to operate for the era in which we were founded and not the era in which we currently are.
Amen. Amen. So that's a really important piece, because I mean, we design systems. There's people in the audience that design systems, and then there's people that are academic. You know, we're still kind of navigating on an old map, and we have to think about the fact that we're in a new world and it requires a new map, like Einstein says. So, Gary, Bolles, it's all you.
So first, I just want to thank the ON team for putting this together. It's always fascinating to me to be included in the discussion. I actually found this merry band because Mr. Dumsch kept CCing me on his LinkedIn posts, and I think every arena needs a flamethrower and a table pounder. So we actually do agree on quite a number of things. So I'm the author of The Next Rules of Work, it's a book written during the pandemic on the future of work. I'm the chair for the future of work. I've been a longtime chair for the future of work with Singularity University, and now a global fellow with them. I have 10 courses on LinkedIn Learning with 1.5 million learners. And my cred in this arena is that in 2010, through my company, Charette LLC, I co-chaired a conference on unbundling higher education, and then wrote a piece on Medium that has been cited by a number of university presidents to tell me that it was sort of formative in thinking about sort of this next phase of higher education. And I have to say, I've got an admission to make. I'm not passionate about the arena. What I'm passionate about is the tagline for Charette: no human left behind. And if the way we can ensure that is with traditional colleges, that is awesome. But my admission is that I don't have enough college to stuff into a thimble. Never interested in college, just sort of jumped into this work box. But I advise a lot of university presidents and others who are trying to reshape the arena. So I do have some opinions.
So this is interesting, and this is something that, while we were prepping, what we have come up with is that parents, students also need to be in this conversation of what the purpose of higher ed is and what higher ed is going to mean for them. What should they invest in? So we're going to probably have a couple beehives that are dedicated around the conversation about higher ed for parents and students. So we're hoping you and others would want to join that. You know, this audience, this group will definitely be a part of that. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Christine, who is a close friend in terms of knowing each other. We've met on Clubhouse. Probably is one of the best moderators on Clubhouse. I would give her that. Look, she even has the yellow background look and feel. So Christine, it's all yours.
Thanks, Matt. I'm really happy to be here with all of you. I'm Christine Lusser. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist by training, and I'm really passionate about making sure that the way people teach aligns with the way that brains learn. And I've spent most of my career at Minerva. I originally got hired to help build the business college there. And when Minerva University got its own accreditation, it spun out into a freestanding nonprofit. And those of us who had been there since the beginning sort of had a choice, whether we were going to keep shepherding the university, which takes about 200 students every year, or we were going to try to expand the mission of Minerva, which is to nurture critical wisdom for the sake of the world by building partnerships with other universities. And since I really care about scale and impact, and I like to make new mistakes, I went the partnership direction. And we work with other universities to help them rethink their student learning journeys so that they're more relevant, effective, and experiential.
And I love the fact that you talked about partnerships, because as we were going through the dialogue among ourselves, partnerships started to come out, and we're going to talk about industry partnerships and how that's going to be play a role. I think schools have to partner with each other, just like you're doing now with Minerva, from community colleges to their respective four-year schools, you know, high schools to community colleges, high schools to the 4 years, right? There is these partnerships that we really have to. So as we start to dialogue a little bit, I think it's going to be a really important conversation we're going to be having. For the audience that has just heard all about these folks, I welcome you to follow them on LinkedIn. I welcome you to follow Beyond Academics, because we're going to be talking about these topics all the time. These folks are the ones that'll give you a little bit of a different perspective that I think is really healthy in the way we do it. Now, just in all transparency, not all of us agree on the same points here, but we all agree that we have to think about how do we improve higher ed in the way, how do we improve learners, how do we improve the workforce? All these things are really important parts of the conversation we're having. So what does this mean? This is the kind of flow that we were having yesterday and day before yesterday as we prep. Now, you're not going to need to look at this, but I want you to understand that the different tentacles of conversation that we were having before and during our prep, and we will have now and even have as we move forward. We will probably tackle some of this. We may not tackle all of this, but yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about closures. We're going to start right there. We're not going to live on that conversation, but then whose purpose are we really going to be driving towards? Is it the institution? Is it the individuals? There's different reasons why each of those have importance, and we have to realize that we have to serve both sides. President Bull has talked about what he calls the outsider higher education. I'm going to have him dive deep into that a little bit, give him a little bit of that room to tell us what he thinks about that. And then there's these shifts that we have to think about. Of course, Kate was talking about the network of trust, and Keil talks about the degrees, and Gary talks about when students are going to college. We're going to start tackling all of these things. Now, anything we missed here, we also want to hear from you. So if things that we're going through a conversation and you think we should talk about, definitely put that in chat. Also, if you want to join us on stage, let us know. We'll bring you up, and we're going to take a conversation that way. So let's just go right off the bat. The conversation about closures. There's a set of closures that we see. We see LinkedIn posts. Kate was saying that one of her alma maters are potentially in that crosshairs. I want to, Mark, because you threw that link up, let's start with you. When we think about closures, give us the lay of the land really quick, and then I want you to then move us towards the conversation of the why there is potential closures. And Keil, maybe you can dive in a little bit on that. So Mark, go ahead with that. And of course, what I told everyone in our prep was, if they want to talk, they on mic and we have a conversation. So everyone has free roam. I think we have a little bit of a mic. If you turn the mic on and off, you'll see that somebody wants to talk, and we're going to do that. I see that Gabrielle has put me on a 30-minute timer. Mark, it's all yours.
I was worried she'd already put me on the timer preemptively, and I was hurt. I have to say, I was hurt deeply, Gabrielle. Okay, so closures is the thing that is definitely on the radar, right? It's in the news. We talk about it. And there's been closures for a lot longer time than we've been tracking, right? There have been colleges that have been closing for decades, right? So this is not an entirely new thing, but we did start to see folks paying attention to more closures in the last couple of decades. I will add that we also didn't do a very good job of parsing the difference between a University of Phoenix branch campus in a strip mall somewhere closing and a small college in a small town that's been there for 150 years closing. But we still started counting all this stuff, and we started paying attention to it. My starting point from all this stuff was seeing a number of folks write to say, yeah, it's going to happen. Let it happen. Let them all go. We don't need them. We don't need them. If they can't get it right, the heck with them. And my point was, hold on. The purpose or / impact of higher education is also a function of the institutions that, for lack of a better term, deliver it. And their impact in their communities is not insubstantial. And given how much small towns across this country have lost in other pretty important economic drivers, we probably shouldn't just be so, and I'm not blaming everybody for this, but there was an awful lot that seemed to be written about, we should be fine if we, get down to enough institutions on one hand. And I thought that was something that we might want to think a little bit more carefully about.
So So Mark, if you were, there's always this value question, like why are schools closing? Is it the enrollment are down and they just can't, they're not able to sustain because they don't have enough enrollment? Is it that their costs are too high so that their enrollment doesn't cover that? Is the value of what they're offering not hitting value? Like, what is the reason why? And I see, Kate, you were kind of smiling, so join in. I a little bit of that narrative. Yeah. Good. Either one, Kate or Mark, can certainly say it, and then Keil definitely jump in.
Mark, did you want to take this, or do you want me to jump in?
Well, I can start, and you can come in and close out the game for us if you want. Whether that means coming in the third inning or the ninth, that's up to you. But look, there's a whole bunch of reasons, right? There's a whole bunch of reasons why colleges are closing, and we have to remind folks that there's different kinds of colleges and different reasons in different contexts, right? Some of them have just been absolutely stupid with managing the institution, and the incentive structure is such that anybody who gets in charge just tries to get it to the next individual and kick the can down the road and get their golden parachute. So there's some of that. There's certainly some where they just can't get enough students. And you asked one question in particular that relates to the work that I do, that the perception of cost and the perception that cost is too high is absolutely a driver, even though underneath that, the reality for many of those small schools is that the cost that everybody sees when they advertise it isn't close to what they actually charge. That's a separate issue for probably another conversation with parents and students. But there's lots of different reasons why colleges are closing, and it's probably worthwhile understanding which colleges are closing for what reasons.
Yeah, I mean, right on. And it's getting easier, by the way, to predict which colleges are going to close, right? And so, with reasonable exceptions, when you start looking at institutions that have fewer than 2,000 students, that are trying to deliver on this old model of being sort of a mini city where it's a undergraduate residential campus experience that has dormitories and cafeterias and even little police forces and whatnot, the overhead is incredibly expensive when you don't have enough students to spread out those costs across. But if you look at these small institutions, fewer than 2,000 students, private, liberal arts, religiously affiliated is a really high risk factor for closure at this point. And I think you ask a really great question, Matt. So but why can't they hold it together? And there's several reasons. Dr. Kabari actually just posted in the chat, relevance. And he's absolutely right. So, today's learners are by and large shopping for something a little bit different than what they were shopping for when these institutions were founded. And if institutions can't figure out how to be relevant, that the classroom experience isn't interesting, it's not flexible, I can't choose to do it in my own favorite modality and then change my mind about what my favorite modality is next week and be able to switch from in person to online and do that without having to waste a semester. Students are just they're voting with their feet, so to speak. And it is a heavy lift. Institutions used to make promises, and they still make promises like, come to our campus, we'll change your life. And today's students are saying, prove it. And it's incredibly hard to prove it. And there are so many competitors. And so I think that it used to be enough to be the place where your parent got their degree or whatnot. But we have really, really discerning customers when it comes to learners today. And it's really, really hard. Also, I think that the vast majority of institutions are being run by people who have zero business sense. And I say that with all due respect for the hundreds of presidents I know, and some of them are really brilliant. But we need, I think a few more MBAs and a few less PhDs at the top, so that we can understand the financial implications of running an institution.
Keil, give us your quick thoughts. And I want to then go to President Bolles because he actually runs a university for this question. So go ahead, Keil. Give us your synopsis really quick in terms of
Kate's right. I think there are way too many colleges. This has been a problem dating from the 19th century. At the end of the 19th century, we had more colleges than all of Europe. Kate is right that we let them get way too big and lavish. We've made our official education policy to get a lot of people degrees, and people are balking at the cost. I disagree with Mark. I think it's not just a perception that it's too expensive. It's too expensive. And, just the pocket of West Central Michigan where I grew up, you have two huge public universities in a 40-mile stretch. And a lot of people from all over the state are just saying, look, I can't afford this. I'm going to go into the trades. I'm going to go into small businesses. I'm going to go into a non-degree profession. And long-term, the big threat to enrollments in colleges is going to be the loss of their credential monopoly. You're going to see more and more employers adopt skills-based hiring, and we're going to see more closures.
So I want to talk about credentials, because this is one of the conversations that we have always had, is how does credentials play a role in the future of higher ed? Like right now, most universities, they just have a bunch of people that are just giving out badges and they think that's credentialing. And we have to recognize that badging and putting credentials in a system isn't the actual way of actually educating people. That you're just unbundling coursework and putting it in, right? So there is this conversation. We'll have a different beehive on that, but I want us to recognize we should think about, if we're going into the workforce and there's skills, and we're going to talk through that a little bit, we have to re-engineer the credentialing piece. Now, Keil, really quick, if higher ed was free, would you think then everything is okay? If there was a way for everyone to, run their campus, but it was free for the students, would you be okay with how higher ed is operating today?
No,
okay.
No. I mean, there's also this seat time element that is incredibly prohibitive. It's like
that's what I wanted to. I wanted to pull that out of you, because I wanted people to realize it isn't just a dollar element. People's time and the ability to be restricted is going to be a really important piece. So, hey, Maya, welcome. I'm going to let President Bull chime in, and then I'm going to let Maya jump on, because I see her, she's on. President Bull, go ahead.
Sure. One of the things I find really, really intriguing when we get in these conversations is I do think that the data is really important for us to just put on the table. So just for us to acknowledge, we've had approximately 1,000 closures in the last 40 years, and approximately 1,500 to 2,000 new colleges start in the last 40 years. I'm not talking about in the next phase. If we talk about outside of higher ed, I'll suggest we've had over 6,000 starts, but I'm just talking about what we think of as more traditional, including online kinds of colleges. But we've had we've had more colleges start than we've had close in the last 40 years. I'm just naming that. Whether that's good or bad or whatever, I think it's important for us to acknowledge. If there's someone that wants to question the statistics, that's important for us to the data. That would be really important for us to kind of take a look at, because I think it frames the rest of our conversation. I'll say this though: why do colleges close? I don't think it. All of the factors that have been mentioned, I agree with that those are factors for some people and for some closures. I've visited over 500 campuses in the country. I've studied and interviewed lots of leaders of colleges that have closed and almost closed. I did that in advance of taking over a college that was on the brink of closure. I thought we had it turned around, but 3 years later, after I left it did close. And I will say this: the reason colleges close, and this may speak a little bit to one of the comments, I think maybe Kate before, colleges close because their expenses are greater than their revenue from all sources. And I think that's really important to start at that very base foundation. It's not because of who wants what or doesn't want. It's for that very simple financial reason. There are some that may close for a handful that close for other reasons. But when it really comes down to it, somehow they do not have a financial model that provides adequate resources to cover the expenses that they've chosen to have. And choice is a factor there. I'll just stop there for this phase of the conversation.
No, it's good. It's good. Maya, welcome. Join in on the conversation. What's your thoughts on what we're saying?
Well, so for me, I have been in higher ed for the last 20 something years and at campuses of all sizes and kinds. I now work independent of a campus with students. And I can't believe I'm saying this out loud. It kind of hurts my soul to say this, but
You want us to
Campuses-
want us to beep you at this time?
Yeah,
Like we could beep
I
the
don't
whole
know.
thing
Like,
out.
I don't know. I'm going to say it and then I'll just wait for the fallout. But, colleges have become corporations with classrooms, and I don't think we talk about it in that context. And for me, my question about why colleges are closing, is it because of mismanagement? Is it because they're not meeting the need of their customer well? Is it because the institution has aged out of the system and they're just not going to get the enrollment that they once had? Like, what is the root cause? But then also, let's go back to this problem of higher ed is now a corporation. It's a corporation first and then a center for learning and blah, 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 blah after that.
But is that a problem, Maya? So like that, so I would argue.
I don't know. Is it?
Right.
Like,
I'm glad you brought it up, right? And listen, I used to
Yeah.
work at a medical institution where I actually referred to the students as customers once, and I literally thought the president was just going to fire me on the spot.
Right.
Like, he was like, "They're not customers." But to Bernard's point, right? This is simple math. Like, an institution cannot continue to offer meaningful things and grow and stay in business if its expenses outstrip its revenue, right? This is just simple math. And if we can have more of a corporate mindset about how we're running these institutions, we can. And so my argument would be, and I sense you probably agree, that it's a little bit of both, right? So what does it look like if we can be very mission-based and keep the students at the center of everything we do and understand that their purposes, whatever it is they want to learn and the reasons they want to learn it and how they measure the success of that learning, we need to understand that. And then we have to figure out a business model in which we can deliver that over and over again for the number of students that we have demand for and keep ourselves in business. And so I think it's both, right? And I think that if we're too focused on mission, we forget, how to keep the lights on. And I think that if we're too focused just on dollars and cents, then we're not figuring out how to support students appropriately if it's just about, right? So right now, I work with a lot of colleges that keep bragging about, oh, we just had our biggest freshman class ever, right? That is code for we're graduating at a rate of 50% or less. And so we're just filling up the funnel, right? We don't have enough overall enrollment. So we just keep shoving in freshmen, knowing that they're going to keep falling out and that the attrition is really high, but they're bragging about that freshman number. But if we're in the business of degrees, we have to be in the business of completing those students and giving them those degrees. And we have to figure out how we're going to do that. And so I think that, I think it's sort of all of these things. I mean, I think you brought up a really great question. And I think that we have to take what worked in the 19th century and apply it to now and let go of all the things that don't serve us anymore.
Yeah. Thank you, Kate. So, yeah, go ahead, Maya.
Okay. I'll be quick. So
yeah, be quick because
I saw the timer.
Yeah,
So,
timer's gone and it went over twice. So
yes.
let's move it because I want us to move the conversation between all of us, and I want us to drive it a little bit that way. Okay.
Absolutely. So Kate, I agree with you. I think the focus on admissions is totally and completely irrelevant, and we need to be talking about how many people were graduating versus how many people were admitting. The other part I think that is really important that we don't talk about is approaching the cost of higher education as a big ticket item. And do you purchase a big ticket item in the same context that you are paying for higher education?
That's done now. Yeah. No, and I think that is a really important piece of this conversation is if you're going to go invest this much money, what are you going to get out of it? And then how do we hold the people that you're buying from is delivering to that? That's a really important piece. So I'm going to move to Gary really quick in terms of, because I want us to move to the next, like the perspective of, hey, because if different people have different perspectives on what the purpose is, right? Gary, can you give us a little bit on the perspective of what students, individuals want out of college? And then if you want, can you chime in a little bit on what institutions might want out of college or what they're delivering to the market? Because I think might be a disconnect in terms of, and this goes back to Kate, the consumer and what the demand of that product is given by the college?
So I think it's important to be, first off, and I understand that there are people that want the purpose of the institution itself to be beyond just being a market, and there's a visceral response to talking about the student as a customer. But there's really a set of customers that are involved. It's the student, but it's also parents who are paying, and it's the government who often is backing student loans. And I call those the upstream customers. And then the downstream customer is an employer, because sooner or later that young person is going to launch into adulthood and is going to likely have work. So understanding all of those stakeholders and what they want is really, really important. And you have to think of it as a market, right? Because if people just stop hiring, for instance, from a particular college, they go hire from other colleges, then that college may be now at existential risk because it hasn't met the need of its downstream stakeholders. So, but if you don't mind popping up the slide, let me just give you sort of my cosmology on this. And I mentioned that I wrote this piece on unbundling higher education. And I don't want to, I'm not trying to be a reductionist. I'm just trying to simplify. Like, okay, let's just, what are the reasons people go to college and why would they get a degree? So I basically think there's three reasons to go if you're in that young adult launchpad period. And by the way, we are focusing so heavily on that young adult and that launchpad period. There is absolutely no reason that all of the assets that universities bring and colleges bring couldn't be used for older populations. And that's what many will need to do to survive. But we can keep on focusing on the traditional role that these institutions play, which is young adult launchpad. So why does the young adult want to launch? Well, they want to, we want them to develop as human beings, as citizens, grow, learn. We want them to be able to connect. They've got to be able to have a network. They want to find friends, tribe, mate. And then we want them to prepare, to develop skills, to be able to go into an arena. And we said, oh, well, then the result is they get a degree. Well, then why would you do that? Well, again, I'm going to give three reasons. You want to gain something, which is often self-confidence or an identity, reduce risk of job search, and increase your future income. Yeah. And that's kind of it.
And I think that's a really important, so you box this in. I'm going to ask Christine to, when Minerva was forming, did you guys take the purpose of what higher ed is and how was that designed? And I'd love for you to kind of even speak to the fact of how are you innovating with these schools now you're partnering with? Can you give us a little bit of that perspective? I think that'd be a really good one for our audience to understand.
I think that it's a real privilege that we got to build from scratch. So at Minerva University, we said, hey, not everything universities do is bad, but if you were going to blank slate it, what could you do that hasn't been done before? Would you keep things that exist or would you do something different? We have small class sizes, we have accreditation, we have students doing experiential learning activities, but the model is completely different than what you would typically see at a traditional brick and mortar institution. Students at Minerva University spend the first semester in San Francisco and then they pick up and they move to Taipei. Then in the second year, they live in Seoul and Hyderabad, then they go to Berlin and Buenos Aires, then they go to London and they go back to San Francisco to graduate. And what that lets us do is rent out spaces and use cities as a campus. And that cuts down on infrastructure costs. We don't pay for faculty offices. Students take their courses virtually, but they're all live seminar classrooms that nudge students and faculty towards active engaged learning. So we think about the transformation, both in terms of the business model, which brings costs down for students, as well as the experiential model in terms of getting people out to live in the world. You asked me two questions at once. And so with partners,
yes.
What's and really interesting.
Yeah.
We do not have a partner that is sending students out on a global rotation like Minerva University yet. There are schools that are experimenting with that when you can break the model of students have to be here physically. But largely the things that we work with partners on is making education more experiential and more relevant, whatever context they're in. So we use 3 innovation principles to guide that, which is the education should be really grounded in a set of durable, transferable skills. Students should have active learning experiences that bring those skills to life in practice. And faculty's job is to create those experiences and then give frequent formative feedback on it. And you can do that in a traditional campus environment, or you can do it while students travel the world.
Do you
It goes back to those high impact practices.
Do you feel there's resistance? Like, so because in Minerva,
no,
you
this
had
job's really easy.
Yeah. So I think part of the conversation for us to think about the purpose and shifting from that is how do we get these schools to think differently? Like, so Minerva, you were kind of like free. Your handcuffs were off, right? Whereas these schools, they're rooted in certain things and certain even funding, protocols that they get from the state, right? The accreditations, right? They're a little bit of handcuffed in that manner. How do you overcome that? How do we get people to think through that in that way?
I think the first thing is understanding the boxes you're playing in and whether they're real or they're imaginary. Yeah. I think a lot of faculty are like, we couldn't do that because of accreditation. And accreditation actually isn't that bad. It really is just inconsistent with some structures that already exist. And your structures can be changed if you're intentional about why you're doing the things that you're doing and still meet all of the accreditation requirements. So our job is to kind of agitate and ignite people's imagination to say, not everything you're doing is bad, but if you didn't have to do it that way, what would you do instead? And what I find works really well to the point of this conversation is helping universities think about their mission first. What are you trying to do? Students are at the center of every university's mission, but they're not at the center of their actions. And going back and saying, hey, what is this mission? How can you articulate it more cleanly? Then how do you use that as a North Star so your decisions focus on that? That's what's going to make higher education feel relevant to students, which is going to hopefully increase your enrollment. And when it's managed financially well, you will continue to persist. But it really has to go back to what's your promise to students, and then how are you delivering on it?
So because you went from the Minerva conversation to the working with, traditional schools and partnership, and they having their constraints, I want to move us to this conversation about outsider higher ed that Bernard was socializing with us. And Bernard, I'm going to give you a little bit of time, not excessive time, but enough to give the audience your perspective on it. And then I want us to then morph into why are those outside higher ed delivering a certain way, and how does that come to the purpose of delivering skills, career gates, and even the 3 E's that Kate talks about. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the audience, give you some time with the audience on this concept of outsider higher ed.
Great, thank you. May I ask Christine just a very quick question? I think it's just an informational question. Does Minerva or does it participate in the federal financial aid program?
Minerva University does not. We made a very intentional choice that a lot of those things increase costs. And so you can get students to get scholarships through that, but it increases the burden on the organization to do a lot of reporting. So we do not take government money at Minerva University, but most of our partner institutions do.
Thank you. And then a follow-up question. Since Minerva does not, you're not required to submit any data to the federal government. Do you know if Minerva voluntarily submits its data to the National Center for Education Statistics?
I will find out.
Because my guess is no, but it could be yes. The reason I'm bringing that up is that means that Minerva is not counted among the 5,500 to 6,000 colleges and universities that we often talk about in existence. And that's a wonderful lead into the idea of outsider higher education.
Love being an outsider.
Yes. So the concept of outsider higher education is just something I kind of played around with a number of years ago. I was doing a keynote at EDUCAUSE, and I'd been really intrigued. I'm fascinated by art, and especially self-taught artists. And so I learned about this concept of outsider art. I'm not an artist. I'm not an expert in this field or anything like that. But outsider art, sometimes I know it. There are people listening who are art experts, and they may challenge this definition. So my apologies for oversimplifying. But my understanding of outsider art historically is it's expressions of art that's largely outside of the established art community. And it may even be people who are creating, and they don't even think of what they're creating as art necessarily, or others don't recognize or acknowledge it as art. And yet, outsider art over time has become assimilated. You can actually go to a conference on outsider art today. It's actually been assimilated into the larger world of art. And yet it's this whole expression of art that wasn't really formally acknowledged or even studied for years and years. And so when I use the phrase outside of higher education, I'm suggesting the same thing. And I do think that it's critically important that when we're talking about higher education, we acknowledge that higher education is more than just the 5,500 to 6,000 colleges and universities that submit their data to the federal government on a regular basis, that participate in the federal financial aid program. There are beauty schools, there are trade schools, there are executive coaching programs, there are things like Coursera, even something like Minerva potentially could be one of those that isn't counted formally. It may or may not be, depends on whether they voluntarily submit their data, but they're not required to if they're not participating in the federal financial aid program. And so I mentioned before that there have been 1,500 to 2,000 starts of colleges in the last 40 years. Those are actually ones that are documented and counted, that participate in one way or another in the federal system. If we go beyond that, my personal estimate, and you can kind of make up these numbers a little bit depending upon how far out you go in terms of how informal or formal you want these learning experiences to be. But post-secondary education, there have been at least 6,000 new startups that are offering post-secondary education opportunities for people in the last 40 years. So you say 6,000 plus the 1,500 to 2,000 colleges that have started. We're talking about 7,500 potential starts of higher education, of post-secondary learning opportunities and experiences that have been launched in the last 40 years. In contrast to the 1,000 or so colleges that have closed. If we look at campuses, by the way, it's a lot more than 1,000. So one college may have 10 or 15 campuses, and so that's where you'll see like 4,000 or 5,000 kinds of closures or something like that. And I think this is really important because at its core, education has, at some element, it's related to learning, so you're engaging with a community, and maybe the learning is happening in terms of social connections. Maybe it's happening in terms of a formal training program related to a discipline or a field of study. There's some kind of learning that happens, and the learning ecosystem, the post-secondary learning ecosystem, is massive today. And I do believe that conversations about the future of higher education warrant our consideration of that larger ecosystem.
So how do we measure the value? We talked about the purpose, and Gary talks about there's certain reasons why people go to school. Why isn't there a measure that we can measure the value, like jobs, people in jobs, the number? Like, I know that data is also, and honestly, with AI coming in, maybe we can build something like that. Why isn't there a measure of that? Because I want to move the conversation to a little bit on the workforce side, and I'm going to let Kate speak to that a little bit. And I see Gary kind of wants to chime in too. So I'm going to let you guys do that. So is there a reason why there isn't measures that are just tangible, like even for the outsider higher ed as well as the insider higher ed? Like, why are we not measuring the success of any of those educations that people are spending money on? And maybe, Mark, you know that too, because you're talking with parents. Any one of you guys can jump on that, but I want Kate to then move on to the workforce.
Can I say something really quick, Matt?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, in response to Bernard's comment, yes, there are a lot of colleges opening up. They may be innovative. However, college is not just a learning ecosystem, it's a credentialing system. And if a new college does not have power with its credential, a lot of people aren't going to go there. This is why I keep saying the credentialing function needs to be removed from colleges' control. That way the innovative colleges can flourish. If you take something like Minerva, I travel in tech circles, that's a respected college. But some brand new other college, maybe, people don't know about it. So if I'm a student and want to go there, why would I take that risk if we have this current system where the colleges are issuing the degrees?
I think there's a fictitious.
I'll give a 10-second response.
Yeah.
I've studied at 17 universities. I have 5 degrees.
You're making us look bad.
But I only have 5 out of studying at 17 universities. And if you count the number of higher education institutions in which I've participated, post-secondary, outsider, it's at least 300 in my learning journey. What's that? So my whole
That's a
point is
different
I
thing.
acknowledge that credentials are a key aspect of higher education today, but I do think that we really narrow the conversation if we somehow suggest that higher education is exclusively or only about credentials.
But that's not what we're saying. That's not what I'm saying. Yes, it's a learning, there's a learning element to it, but especially in the hiring sphere and the first job, the degree is the overriding factor.
So let's shift this over. Let's shift this over to what Kate's going to talk about in terms of workforce and the concept of that. Because I think in the end, and I think you'll agree with me, Keil, higher ed is only going to change when hiring managers decide that a degree that we all think is valuable, that we all, put value on, or some people do, that maybe there's a different measure to that, right? Kate, let's go. I know we got like less than 10 minutes. So I want to tackle a little bit about that. And
I'll just
Steve,
make a couple of points. And
yeah.
I know Mark can sort of speak quickly about why there aren't good measures of ROI. But a couple of things come to mind that I think we should be thinking about. So sometimes we have to make the changes and then sort of create new standards where then the marketplace says, oh, well, I like how this works, so therefore I expect it from other colleges. A great example of that is that when you get your transcript from an institution like Capella University, the skills, the skill sets that you were taught, those competencies that are associated with each course are listed. So instead of knowing that this job candidate took a course called Engineering 101, right, it tells us what did that job candidate actually learn and what can they do as a result of that, right? If all colleges start doing that, or most colleges, or colleges, to Keil's point, that people think are reputable and people say, "Ooh, yeah, I want to." If we see that start happening, then there will be a demand for those sort of proven outcomes, or at least tying those back. And so I think that those are interesting things to be thinking about. And I think, you talked earlier, Matt, about partnerships. I think community colleges are the place where we're going to continue to see they really lead the charge in partnerships, but colleges of all types are doing really meaningful things, developing programs, where part of what you're doing is in the class and part of it is hands-on with an institution, and maybe you're getting some sort of industry credential while you're also working on an academic credential. And I think that's really, really important. And then you look at institutions like Northeastern University, and with full disclosure, they're my largest client. But take a look at what they're doing, and have been doing for the longest time with their co-op program, right? So there's a reason that a place like Northeastern ends up being #1 in career services, because when you go there, you end up spending somewhere between 12 months and 18 months taking 6-month breaks from the classroom to go work jobs, to try out your skills and figure out if you really want to do what you think you want to do. And then you're walking out with career experience. And I think those connections are really, really critical. And then I'll go ahead and hand this off to Mark, who I know wanted to jump in, would talk about ROI for a second.
Well,
go ahead, Mark. And then Gary, I see you're up, and then we're going to let Steve jump into the conversation.
The ROI thing was 5 questions ago, so I don't know how useful this is now. But the the reason that we don't have great data on that is because we don't have student level data. That's the institutions aren't required to report that. So you have averages, and then you have averages of averages. So
this is the most craziest thing, right? If we were to go buy a house, the amount of information we would need to validate that purchase of that house for 100,000, 500,000, whatever, is this, right? We would go through all these inspections. Hello, if we're giving out federal financial aid or any type of aid, loans, whatever, why are we not thinking through those kind of metrics?
Well, whoever we is, we did 2007 Spellings Commission suggested collecting student level data. The higher ed lobby fought back hard, and that never got anywhere. So the reason that we don't collect student level data is the college's lobby successfully argued that we shouldn't collect it. And so we don't, right? So this is one of the things that I think I'm sort of uniquely positioned to talk about. I have the largest data set by far of the actual prices that students pay at colleges across the country, across the different student types, that anybody has collected, because I started collecting all this stuff because I was a nerd. And so I know that students can pay nothing to go to college, or they can pay $100,000 to go to college for a year, and everything in between across every different student type. So that's the truth. Going back to Bernard's point very early on about we kind of need to know what the data is and what the truth is. That's the truth. So we don't have that data isn't used in the publications out there that put out ROI stuff. So in place of that, we have some decent data, not great, but some little bit better data on the R, the return, right? But we have crap data on the I, the investment. So everything we're telling people has got all kinds of false positives and false negatives.
I think part of that is, Mark, we have to shed the light on it, right? We got to figure out how to shed the light on it. We got to get HR. We got to, half the problem is the HR side of how people get hired, what the gates are, all those things that are being put into place. Gary, go ahead really quick. I know we got like 2 minutes and then I want to get Steve in and we'll close up. But Gary, go ahead.
So there is reasonable data from macro studies that estimates something around the lifetime increased earnings of certain kinds of degrees in certain industries. They're overly cited by the education industry to justify the investment, right?
Yep.
So Mark is right. We don't know quite what the investment is, but to justify the investment. So, and I just put this in the chat. So how do we measure the success of going to college as an individual, as a learner? You finished your degree, doesn't always happen. You got a job within 6 months of graduating. The job was in your trained field. You kept your job for several years. You stayed in the field for several years. You made more money than if you hadn't gotten the degree, and your student loans didn't hold you back from future opportunities. That's a big Venn diagram. It's a lot. So success has to be all these factors added up that are subjective for a better life for the learner. Now, the studies of did you use your college degree in your future work are dismal for the arena, but that's because in some ways we as humans, we don't have a Fitbit for learning, right? There's no technology that told us that we gathered these skills and how much we learned and what we enjoyed and all the friends that we made, and we tend to forget a lot of that stuff. However, it's a lot of factors for success, and yes, you're not going to get students to report it. It's very hard to get the hirers to report it. However, I think it's a fixable problem, or else we're all having a very hypothetical conversation that is not practical.
Thank you, Gary.
Well, the value stuff never used to be part of the equation. It's pure nonsense. And it was put forward by colleges themselves to steer the discussion away from the prohibitive costs. It just wasn't part of the discussion at all.
All right, Steve, welcome on board. We're almost at the top of the hour, so go ahead, give us a little bit of golden nugget, and then we'll try to close it out.
Maybe a little nerdy, like Mark was talking. First of all, thanks. I love this group. I love being part of an eclectic group of educators. Kate,
Steve, can you shout a little bit louder?
Yeah.
I think you're far away from your mic, or it's somewhere else.
Yeah.
There we go.
Better? Is that better?
There you go. Better.
Awesome. And Kate, I was part of the commencement project. So I think that I'm part of a community college system in Michigan, and Michigan is not a state-run system, so every school is independent. There's 28 in the state of Michigan. We set up something 2 years ago called the Office of Possibilities. It was a space to intentionally explore the disruption of ourselves, because we knew that if we didn't do something different, it would come from the outside in. I have to call out to Christine, because we've been drinking Minerva's Kool-Aid I've been following them for about 6 years. I've got a group of people building the Intentional University right now. And I would just encourage every college to consider sending out a dinghy of innovation. While you're working on the Titanic, you've got to send out a dinghy of innovation where you experiment and where you explore, and where the resources are being provided, because all of the theory of disruptive innovation says that's the way you're going to change things. You're not going to change the mothership, but if you have permission to send out a dinghy of innovation, that's the way to go. So I just throw that out as my 2 cents.
No, that's great.
I'll connect with anybody who's interested in continuing and deepening a conversation about that. We don't have all the answers for sure, but we just have a conviction that that's the way to go.
Steve, we are building a tribe of dinghies. We're all people that are going to be in dinghies, trying to change higher ed. So I want to say, and look, this is Christine. Look, you got a friend that in Michigan that wants to connect with you. So you guys.
I had an email in my inbox this morning from Steve.
Yeah, and I had no idea
here.
about this group or anything. So we're a bunch of guilty.
You were a connector.
That's great. That's great. Well, we're at the top of the hour. I knew we're not going to get all the topics covered, right? All the things that we were going to cover, that I said we're going to cover, we didn't cover all of that stuff, right? But we are going to try to do this a little bit more often and dive deeper into certain topics. I think, Mark, we probably need to have a conversation about parents and how students think about value. We'll think about that. Christine, I think the conversation about partnerships and how to get schools to think about thinking differently, with Steve and others is a really good, important piece of how we have to change higher ed. And of course, Bernard, I'd love to figure out the factual stuff, Bernard, that you're throwing out here, and for us to drive a little bit of conversation. And then for Keil, I mean, you guys know he just wants everyone to be degreeless, and we'll have a conversation that is a little bit more on that. But I think what Keil is really saying is we gotta not say a degree just a degree, but the value of the degree. And so how does that play a role in terms of credentials and things that it's going to be a big driver. And I think, Gary, you're going to layer over a lot of these conversations. I want to say thank you to this group. For the audience that is here, we will send you a little bit of these folks' info. We'll pretty it up and we'll send it to you all. So if you signed in and through this, you'll just see an email from us. We're not trying to spam you. We're hoping you'll join us in other conversations. And I want to say thank you to everybody for joining us. And we will have another Beehive in the next few weeks. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Matt.